Commander Jake Morrison stood at the big window on his ship and watched the huge space station get bigger as they flew closer to it. The Galaxy Council station was the biggest thing he had ever seen in space, and it looked like a metal city floating among the stars with lights blinking all over its surface like tiny jewels. Humanity had waited 300 years for this day when they would finally be accepted into the galactic community as equals, and not just as the new species that everyone watched with careful eyes. Dr. Lisa Carter sat at her desk going through her notes one more time, as she always did before important meetings. She was the best scientist they had for studying alien life, and she knew more about the 27 different species in the Galaxy Council than almost any other human alive. She looked up at Jake and smiled with excitement dancing in her eyes as she said that this was the day they had all dreamed about since humans first met aliens and learned they were not alone in the universe. The space station guided their ship, called the UES Liberty, into a docking bay that was so big it could have held 10 ships their size. The walls were made of some kind of metal that seemed to change colors as the light hit it, and there were symbols carved into the surface that told stories of the different species that had joined the Council over thousands of years. When the ship finally stopped moving and the doors opened, Jake took a deep breath of the recycled air that smelled slightly different from what they were used to on human ships. Jake walked down the ramp with Lisa and 10 other humans who had been chosen to represent their species. Each person had been picked because they were the best at what they did. Whether that was science or diplomacy or military strategy, they wore their best uniforms and carried documents that contained everything the Council wanted to know about human civilization, including their laws and customs and technology. A tall creature made of what looked like living crystal walked up to meet them. Its body caught the light from the station and threw rainbow patterns on the walls around them. This was Counselor Vexthon, whose species had been the first to find humans when they started exploring beyond their own solar system 50 years ago. His voice came through their translation devices and sounded like music, mixed with the sound of wind through caves. Vexthon told them that the Council was waiting in the Grand Chamber, and that this was a historic day for both humanity and the galaxy. He walked with long, smooth steps that made no sound on the metal floor and led them through corridors that were wide enough for creatures much larger than humans. The walls were covered with art from different worlds, showing scenes of peace and cooperation between species that had once been strangers to each other. As they walked, Jake noticed that something felt wrong, even though he could not say exactly what it was. The corridors seemed too empty for such an important day, and the few aliens they passed looked away quickly instead of greeting the human visitors. Lisa walked beside him, and he could see that she felt it too, because she kept looking around with the same worried expression that she got when her experiments did not go the way she expected them to. The Grand Chamber was a huge round room with a dome ceiling that showed pictures of different planets and star systems. There were seats arranged in circles going up toward the ceiling, and each seat was designed for a different type of alien body. Some were for creatures that flew, while others were for beings that lived in water or needed special gases to breathe. At the center of the room was a platform where important ceremonies took place. But when they reached the center of the chamber, Jake felt his blood turn cold, because instead of a celebration with music and speeches about friendship between species, they found themselves surrounded by armed guards from different alien races. The weapons they carried were unlike anything humans had seen before, and they all pointed toward the small group of human visitors who suddenly felt very far from home. High Counselor Zerkith was a massive creature that looked like it had evolved from some kind of giant lizard. His scales were dark green with patterns of gold, and his eyes were yellow like the sun. When he spoke, his voice was deep and loud enough to shake the air around them. He stood up from a throne that was carved from a single piece of black stone and looked down at the humans like they were insects that had crawled into his house. The High Counselor announced that humans had been judged to be a threat to galactic stability, and that their species was too aggressive and grew too fast for the safety of other civilizations. He said that the council had watched humans for 50 years and seen how quickly they spread from world to world and how they always seemed ready to fight when there was trouble. He declared that humanity could not be allowed to continue growing and spreading through the galaxy. Jake felt the world spinning around him as he realized that this was not a ceremony to welcome humans into the galactic community, but a trap that had been planned for months, or maybe years. The council had invited Earth's best representatives to come here not to celebrate, but to capture them, while their fleets attacked human colonies throughout space. Lisa grabbed his arm, and he could feel her shaking as the truth hit both of them at the same time. The armed guards moved closer, and Jake knew that their peaceful mission had become something else entirely. They were no longer diplomats trying to build bridges between species, but prisoners in an alien place where no one would hear them scream. The Galaxy Council had betrayed humanity, and now the real test of human survival was about to begin. The detention cell was a small metal room with walls that hummed with some kind of energy field that prevented them from breaking out. Jake Morrison sat on the hard bench that served as both chair and bed while Dr. Lisa Carter paced back and forth. Like a caged animal, the other human representatives sat in silence, trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for their people back home. Through the small window in their cell door, they could see alien guards walking past every few minutes. Most of them would not look at the human prisoners, but occasionally one would stop and stare with what might have been curiosity or pity. It was during one of these moments that a young alien guard who looked like a cross between a bird and a lizard whispered something through the door that made their blood run cold. The guard told them in broken human language that the council fleets had already left the station and were heading toward every human world at the same time. This was not just about capturing the diplomatic team, but about destroying human civilization completely. The attack had been planned for years, and every human colony was being targeted at exactly the same moment to prevent any warning from getting through. Lisa stopped pacing and sat down hard on the bench as the full scope of the betrayal became clear to all of them. This was not a political decision or a misunderstanding, but a deliberate attempt to wipe out humanity before they could become a threat to the established order of the galaxy. Every man, woman, and child on every human world was in danger, and there was nothing the prisoners could do to warn them. Captain Ryan Barnes was the youngest member of their team, and he had been chosen because he was good with technology and communication systems. He had been working quietly in the corner of the cell trying to access any kind of signal that might let them contact home. Suddenly his eyes went wide and he motioned for the others to come close as he whispered that he had found something. Ryan had managed to tap into a hidden communication channel that was being used by the alien guards to coordinate their activities. The messages coming through were in different alien languages, but the translation software in his device was working overtime to convert them into words that humans could understand. What they heard made them wish they had never succeeded in making contact. The reports were coming in from human space, and each one was worse than the last. New Tokyo Colony was under heavy bombardment, and their defenses were failing. Europa Base had gone silent after reporting enemy ships in orbit. The mining stations in the asteroid belt were being destroyed one by one without any chance to evacuate their workers. Mars was fighting back, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Lisa put her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out as they listened to the reports of civilian transports being shot down as they tried to escape from the human worlds. These were not military targets, but families with children who had never hurt anyone and who had believed that the galaxy was a safe place where different species could live together in peace. But then something unexpected happened that made Jake sit up straight and listen more carefully to the communications. There was a transmission coming through on a frequency that he recognized from his military training. It was an emergency channel that was supposed to be used only in the worst possible situations when normal command structure had broken down. The voice belonged to Admiral Kate Sullivan, who was in charge of Earth's space defenses. Her words were calm and steady. Even though Jake could hear explosions in the background as she spoke, she said that if anyone was receiving this message, they should know that Protocol 7 was now active and that everyone should remember their training and do what they had been taught to do in this situation. Jake felt his heart start beating faster because he knew what Protocol 7 meant, even though it had never been used before. It was a plan that had been developed in secret by Earth's military leaders, who had learned from human history that sometimes the people who claim to be your friends are actually your worst enemies. The protocol was simple and terrible, and it had only one word that mattered. Admiral Sullivan's voice came through the static one more time, and Jake could hear the sadness in her words as she spoke directly to him by name. She said that if he was listening, then he would know what to do, and that the plan they had all hoped would never be needed was now the only thing that could save humanity from complete destruction. The word came through clearly despite all the interference and noise from the battle that was raging around Earth. It was a word that every human in the military and most civilians had been taught to understand, even if they never expected to hear it used in a real situation. The word that meant everything had gone wrong, and that survival was more important than anything else. Jake looked at his fellow prisoners and spoke the word that would change everything for humanity. The word that meant their civilization, as they knew it was ending, but that their species might still have a chance to survive somewhere else in the galaxy. The word that turned peaceful explorers into desperate refugees with nothing left to lose. Run was the word that Admiral Sullivan had transmitted, and run was what every human who heard it was supposed to do, not fight and die in hopeless battles, but escape and hide and wait for a chance to rebuild somewhere else. It was a word that went against everything humans believed about standing and fighting for what was right. But sometimes running away was the only way to live to fight another. The alien guard who had been helping them came back to their cell and whispered that he had found a way to get them out, but they would have to move quickly before the other guards discovered what was happening. His own species had been betrayed by the Council many years ago, and he understood what it felt like to lose everything to people who had pretended to be friends as they prepared to escape from their prison. Jake realized that this was not the end of humanity, but the beginning of something new and terrible. They were no longer the hopeful young species trying to join the galactic community, but survivors who had learned the hard way that the universe was not a safe place for those who trusted too easily. What the Galaxy Council did not know was that humanity had learned important lessons from their own bloody history on Earth. Species that survived were not the ones that trusted everyone, but the ones that prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. While diplomats had been talking about peace and friendship with alien species, the military leaders and engineers had been working on secret projects that officially did not exist. Hidden throughout human space were emergency bunkers, built deep underground on planets that were not on any official maps, concealed ships that looked like old cargo vessels but were actually equipped with the most advanced technology humans could build, secret colonies that existed in places where no one would think to look for them. All of these preparations had been made just in case the day came when humanity needed to disappear on Earth. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in a command center that was buried so deep under the surface that even nuclear weapons could not reach it. Around her, dozens of officers worked at computers that controlled systems spread across the entire solar system. When the word run was transmitted on the special emergency frequency, it activated hidden programs that had been waiting for years. Sullivan watched as concealed launch bays opened across Earth's surface, like metal flowers blooming in reverse. The bays had been disguised as everything from mining operations to water treatment plants, but now they revealed their true purpose as ships that officially did not exist, began lifting off carrying the most important people and resources that humanity needed to survive. Each ship had a different destination and carried different cargo, but all of them had the same mission, which was to make sure that human civilization would continue. Even if the homeworlds were destroyed, some carried genetic samples of Earth plants and animals, while others carried complete libraries of human knowledge. Still others carried the best scientists and engineers and military leaders. The Phoenix Protocol was the name given to this desperate plan, and like the mythical bird that burned and then rose from its own ashes, humanity was preparing to die in one form and be reborn in another. Even if 90% of humans were killed, the remaining 10% would remember what had been done to them and would carry that memory to new worlds. Jake Morrison and his fellow prisoners followed the alien guard, whose name was Quilp, through maintenance tunnels that ran between the walls of the space station. Quilp moved with quick, sure steps. Even though his bird-like feet were not designed for the metal surfaces, he whispered that his own people had been betrayed by the Council 3 generations ago when they became too successful at trade and exploration. Quilp explained that his species had made the same mistake that humans were making now, which was to believe that other species would be happy to share the galaxy with newcomers. Instead, the Council had destroyed most of his people and scattered the survivors to distant worlds where they could never again become powerful enough to challenge the established order. The tunnels were dark and filled with the sound of machinery that kept the station running. They crawled through spaces that were barely big enough for human bodies while trying not to make any noise that would alert the guards to their escape. Lisa Carter stayed close behind Jake, and he could hear her breathing hard from the effort and the fear. When they finally reached the docking bay where their ship was waiting, Jake was amazed to see that it had not been destroyed or heavily guarded. Quilp explained that the Council was so confident in their victory that they had not bothered with extra security. They believed that the human prisoners were helpless and that their ship was worthless without a crew to fly it. But what the Council did not understand was that human ships were designed to be operated by small crews or even by one person if necessary. Jake and Ryan Barnes quickly got the engines started while Lisa and the others strapped themselves into seats. They had to leave immediately before anyone discovered that the prisoners had escaped, as the UES Liberty pulled away from the station. Jake opened a communication channel and sent out the emergency signal that would let other humans know that some of their diplomatic team had survived. The signal also contained information about the Council's betrayal and the location of hidden supply caches that could help other survivors. Throughout human space, the evacuation was already underway, as the secret network that had been years in. The making finally revealed itself. On Mars colony, underground bunkers opened to release ships that had been hidden since the first settlers arrived. The ships were small and fast and designed to carry essential personnel to predetermined meeting points. Captain Amy Foster commanded one of these hidden bases on Mars, and she watched as her carefully trained teams loaded equipment and supplies onto ships that would scatter to different parts of the galaxy. Each ship carried enough resources to start a new colony, and each crew had been trained to survive in hostile environments without any support from home. The Council fleets that were attacking human worlds found that their targets were not as helpless. As they had expected, merchant ships suddenly revealed hidden weapons and fought back with desperate courage. Agricultural colonies launched fighters from concealed hangars. Mining stations activated defense systems that should not have existed according to their official records on Europa. Dr. Peter Walsh led the evacuation of the research station while simultaneously copying decades of scientific data to hidden transmitters that would send the information to secret receivers throughout the galaxy. Every piece of human knowledge was being scattered like seeds in the wind, so that even if the libraries were burned, the information would survive. The battle for each human world was fierce but short, because the humans were outnumbered and outgunned. However, the defenders managed to delay the attackers long enough for most of the evacuation ships to escape. The Council had expected to find weak farmers and peaceful scientists, but instead, they found fighters who had been preparing for this day as Jake's ship jumped to hyperspace. He looked back at the Council station and made a promise that someday, humanity would return. They were not running away forever, but regrouping and preparing for a longer war. The Council had started something that they would regret for the rest of their existence. The scattered ships carried more than just people and supplies. They carried the anger and determination of a species that had been betrayed by those they had trusted. Humanity was learning a hard lesson about the true nature of the galaxy. But they were also discovering strengths they had not known they possessed. As the Council fleets moved closer to human worlds, they began to discover that humanity's military strength had been deliberately hidden from their observers. The peaceful merchant ships that traveled between human colonies suddenly dropped their disguises and revealed weapon systems that were more advanced than anything the Council had expected to find among such a young species. The attacks on human worlds did not go as smoothly as the Council leaders had planned because humans had been preparing for exactly this kind of betrayal. Every colony had hidden defenses and every civilian ship carried more firepower than it appeared to have. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that had been pretending to be weaker than they really were. Colonel Amy Foster stood in the command center of a military base that officially did not exist anywhere on Mars. The base had been built deep inside an old mining complex and disguised as a geological research station. Around her, dozens of officers worked at control panels that managed defensive systems spread across the entire planet. When the Council fleet arrived at Mars, they expected to find a small agricultural colony with minimal defenses, but instead they encountered orbital weapons platforms that appeared out of nowhere and surface-to-space missiles that launched from hidden silos. Foster had been training her people for this moment for 5 years, and they were ready. The battle for Mars became the first real test of human military technology against alien forces, and the results surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. The weapons that human engineers had designed worked better than expected, and the tactics that human officers had developed proved effective against alien ships that were larger but less maneuverable. Foster watched the tactical displays as her fighters engaged the enemy fleet in the space around Mars. The human pilots flew with a desperation and fury that the alien commanders had not anticipated. They knew they were protecting not just a planet but the future of their entire species. The aliens had superior numbers and their ships were individually more powerful than anything humans could build, but they had made the mistake of underestimating human determination and ingenuity. Human pilots used kamikaze attacks and suicide runs that no sane alien would attempt. They flew their ships into enemy vessels and detonated nuclear weapons at point-blank range. On the surface of Mars, hidden bunkers opened to reveal ground-based weapons that had been disguised as mining equipment and agricultural machinery. Laser cannons that looked like irrigation systems began firing at the alien ships, while missile launchers that had been hidden inside grain silos sent volleys of warheads toward the enemy fleet. The Council forces eventually overwhelmed the human defenses through sheer numbers, but the cost was much higher than they had expected to pay. For every human ship destroyed, they lost 2 or 3 of their own. For every human pilot killed, they lost crews that had decades of training and experience. Foster knew that Mars could not be saved, but she was determined to make the aliens pay for every meter of ground they took. Her forces retreated to prepared positions and continued fighting even when the situation became hopeless. They were buying time for the evacuation ships and sending a message to the Council about what it would cost to destroy humanity. Meanwhile, on Europa, Dr. Peter Walsh was leading a different kind of battle as he worked to preserve human knowledge and scientific research before the aliens could destroy it. He had teams working around the clock to copy every database and transmit the information to hidden receivers throughout the galaxy. Walsh had spent his entire career studying alien technology, and he understood better than most people how advanced the Council species really were. But he also knew that humans had made discoveries and developed techniques that were uniquely their own. This knowledge needed to survive, even if the worlds where it was created did not. The research station on Europa looked like a peaceful scientific outpost, but it contained some of humanity's most important technological secrets. The work done there had led to breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel and energy generation and weapons technology. All of this information was being compressed and transmitted to secret locations where it could be preserved as the alien fleet. Approached Europa Walsh, made the difficult decision to activate the station's self-destruct sequence rather than let the aliens capture human technology. The explosion was visible from space, and it took with it decades of research, but it also denied the Council access to human scientific knowledge. The pattern was repeated on world after world as human colonies revealed hidden strengths that the Council had not known existed. Peaceful farmers became guerrilla fighters, and harmless research stations became military targets that fought back with unexpected ferocity. The aliens found that conquering human worlds was possible but expensive, and they began to understand that they had seriously underestimated the species they were trying to destroy. Humans did not fight like other species in the galaxy who would surrender when defeat became inevitable. Instead, humans fought until the very end and took as many enemies with them as they could. They destroyed their own facilities rather than let them be captured, and they transmitted their knowledge to hidden locations where it could not be found. They were not just defending territory, but ensuring that their species would survive to fight another day. Captain Ryan Barnes found himself commanding a small fleet of evacuation ships that had escaped from the attack on Europa. His ships were filled with civilians and scientists who carried the knowledge and genetic samples that would be needed to rebuild human civilization somewhere else. Barnes had been trained as a communications officer, but the desperate situation had forced him to become a military commander. He led his small fleet through dangerous space toward a rendezvous point where other survivors were supposed to gather. Along the way, they were attacked by Council patrol ships, but managed to escape through a combination of skill and luck. The evacuation fleets were small and fast, and they scattered in different directions to make it harder for the Council to track them down. Each fleet carried part of what humanity needed to survive, including people with essential skills and equipment for starting new colonies and genetic material from Earth plants and animals, as the human worlds fell one by one. The Galaxy Council began to realize that their victory was not as complete as they had hoped it would be. They had destroyed the major colonies and killed billions of humans, but they had failed to capture or eliminate all of the survivors. Somewhere in the vastness of space-angry humans were regrouping and planning their response. The Galaxy Council declared victory after destroying the major human colonies and killing most of the human population, but their celebration was premature because they had failed to achieve their main goal, which was the complete elimination of humanity scattered across the galaxy. Small groups of survivors were emerging from hidden bases and disguised ships, ready to begin the long process of rebuilding their civilization. Commander Jake Morrison found himself leading one of these survivor groups aboard a ship that had been disguised as an old cargo freighter, but was actually equipped with everything needed to establish a new colony. The ship was called the New Dawn, and it carried 53 people who represented the last remnants of several destroyed human worlds. The survivors came from different backgrounds and had different skills, but they were united by their shared experience of betrayal and loss. There were scientists who had escaped from research stations and soldiers who had fought in the hopeless battles, and civilians who had lost everything but their determination to see humanity survive and eventually prosper again. Jake addressed his crew as their ship traveled through hyperspace toward a destination that existed only in the secret files that Admiral Sullivan had given to selected commanders. He told them that the Council thought they had won by destroying human worlds and governments and armies, but they had made one critical mistake that would eventually cost them everything. Dr. Lisa Carter, who was now serving as the ship's science officer, nodded as she understood what Jake meant. The aliens had created exactly the kind of enemy that was most dangerous to them, which was refugees with nothing left to lose and everything to gain by fighting back. Humans who had lost their homes and families would never give up trying to return and reclaim what had been taken from them. The New Dawn was just one of dozens of ships that were heading toward different star systems at the edge of the galaxy where the Council had never bothered to explore. These regions were considered too dangerous or too poor in resources to be worth the effort, but they would provide perfect hiding places for humans who needed time to rebuild. The plan that Admiral Sullivan and other military leaders had developed was simple in concept but difficult to execute. The scattered human survivors would establish small hidden colonies that could grow slowly without attracting attention. They would avoid building the kind of large cities and obvious installations that had made the original human worlds easy targets. Each colony would be completely self-sufficient and able to disappear quickly if it was discovered by council forces. The humans would live like their ancestors had lived on Earth before they developed advanced technology, in small communities that could pack up and move at a moment's notice if danger approached. Jake's group found their assigned star system after 3 weeks of travel through regions of space that were not shown on any council maps. The system contained several rocky planets that could support human life with some work, and an asteroid belt that contained the raw materials they would need to build their new home. The work of establishing the colony was hard and dangerous because they had limited equipment and no support from established human civilization. Everyone had to learn new skills and take on jobs they had never done before. Scientists became farmers and soldiers became engineers and civilians became whatever the colony needed them to be. Lisa Carter used her knowledge of alien biology to help develop new food sources that could grow in the harsh environment of their new world. She worked with other scientists to modify Earth plants so they could survive in different soil and atmospheric conditions. Every breakthrough was shared with other survivor groups through hidden communication networks. The colony grew slowly and carefully as more survivor ships found their way to the hidden settlements. Each new arrival brought skills and knowledge that made the community stronger. They built underground facilities that could not be seen from space and developed technologies that produced no electromagnetic signatures that might attract unwanted attention. Other human settlements were being established in similar fashion throughout the unexplored regions of the galaxy. Some were built inside asteroid fields where they could not be detected by normal sensors. Others were hidden in the atmospheres of gas giant planets or on moons that orbited dead stars. Captain Ryan Barnes found himself commanding a different kind of settlement that was built entirely on mobile platforms that could move through space without leaving any permanent traces. His people lived on ships that were connected together to form a traveling city that never stayed in one place long enough to be found by enemy scouts. The scattered human communities maintained contact with each other through a communication network that used techniques borrowed from resistance movements throughout human history. Messages were encoded and transmitted through seemingly innocent signals that appeared to be natural cosmic radiation. No single person knew the location of all the settlements, so they could not be betrayed even if someone was captured. Years passed as the hidden colonies grew and developed their own cultures and technologies. The children born in these settlements grew up hearing stories about the betrayal and the destroyed home worlds. They learned to think of themselves not as refugees, but as the seeds of a new human civilization that would someday reclaim its place in the galaxy. The adults worked constantly to preserve human knowledge and culture while adapting to their new circumstances. They established schools and workshops and laboratories where the next generation could learn the skills they would need for the long struggle ahead. Every child was taught to be ready to fight and to run and to hide as circumstances required. Trade. Networks developed between the hidden settlements as ships disguised as independent merchants carried goods and information from one colony to another. To outside observers, these ships appeared to be the kind of small-scale smugglers and pirates that existed on the fringes of every civilization. The Council paid little attention to their activities. The Galaxy Council gradually forgot about the human threat as years passed without any major incidents. They assumed that the surviving humans were either dead or reduced to such small numbers that they could never again pose a challenge to the established order. This was exactly what the humans wanted them to think. Meanwhile, in their hidden colonies, Humans were working on projects that would have amazed and terrified the Council if they had known about them. New weapons and ships and technologies were being developed using knowledge gained from studying captured alien equipment. Every breakthrough brought them closer to the day when they could begin their return. 20 years had passed since the Galaxy Council betrayed humanity and destroyed the human colonies. The Council members believed that the human problem had been solved permanently, and they rarely thought about the scattered survivors who had escaped into the unknown regions of space. Occasionally, there were reports of human pirates attacking isolated outposts, but these incidents were dismissed as the dying gasps of a broken species. They were completely wrong about what humanity had become during those 20 years of exile and hardship. The scattered survivors had not spent their time mourning their losses, but preparing for the day when they would return to claim justice for the betrayal. Every hidden colony had become a training ground for warriors, and every survivor had become a weapon, waiting to be unleashed. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of a ship called the Retribution and looked out at the stars that had once seemed friendly, but now felt like a battlefield, waiting for the war to begin. He had been promoted to his rank by the consensus of all the surviving human communities who recognized him as their overall military leader. The Retribution was the first warship that humans had built since the destruction of their original civilization, and it was unlike anything the Galaxy Council had ever seen. It had been constructed in secret using salvaged alien technology combined with human innovations that had been developed during 20 years of desperate research and experimentation. Dr. Lisa Carter worked at the science station and reported that long-range sensors were detecting 17 more ships joining their formation. Each ship represented a different human settlement, and each crew had spent years training for this moment when humanity would reveal itself to the galaxy. Once again, the ships that appeared around the Retribution looked like ordinary cargo vessels and mining ships, but they had been modified with weapons and armor that made them deadly opponents for anyone who underestimated them. The humans had learned to hide their true capabilities behind humble appearances. Jake opened a communication channel that reached dozens of hidden human forces throughout Council space, in remote mining stations and asteroid hideouts and aboard ships disguised as harmless traders. Humans received the signal they had been waiting for. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of 20 years of planning and preparation. The transmission told every human commander that today was the day they would begin to remind the galaxy of an important lesson that the Council had forgotten. Humanity was not a species that could be safely betrayed and scattered and forgotten. They were survivors who remembered every injury and planned carefully for their revenge. Throughout Council space, human forces that had been hiding in plain sight for years suddenly revealed their true nature and began attacking strategic targets with precision and coordination that stunned the alien defenders. Communication relays went dark as human saboteurs destroyed the equipment that allowed different Council worlds to talk to each other. Supply convoys that had been traveling the same routes for decades found themselves under attack by ships that appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. The attackers took what they needed and destroyed the rest, leaving no survivors who could report exactly what had happened or who was responsible. Military bases that had been built to defend against external threats discovered that their most dangerous enemies were already inside their perimeters. Human agents who had spent years working as maintenance workers and supply clerks suddenly revealed themselves as trained soldiers who knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. The first phase of humanity's return was not about conquest or occupation, but about demonstrating that they had survived and grown stronger during their years of exile. They wanted the Council to understand that the scattered refugees had become something much more dangerous than the peaceful colonists who had been betrayed 20 years earlier. Captain Ryan Barnes commanded a strike force that hit 3 different Council installations in a single day. His ships moved through space like ghosts and struck without warning before vanishing back into the darkness. Each attack was carefully planned to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk to his people. The targets were chosen not for their military value, but for their symbolic importance. The humans wanted to send a message that nowhere in Council space was safe from their reach. They could strike at any target they chose, and there was nothing the aliens could do to stop them. Lisa Carter had spent 20 years studying captured alien technology and learning how Council defense systems worked. Her knowledge allowed human strike teams to bypass security measures that should have been impossible to defeat. She had become an expert at finding weaknesses in systems that the aliens thought were perfect. The Galaxy Council found itself facing an enemy that fought unlike any species they had encountered before. Humans did not announce their intentions or demand territory or try to negotiate settlements. They simply appeared and struck and vanished like a nightmare that could not be caught or reasoned with. The Council military commanders tried to respond to the attacks, but they discovered that their enemies knew their procedures and tactics better than they knew them themselves. Every time they sent forces to investigate an attack site, the humans were already gone. Every time they tried to set a trap, the humans avoided it completely. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the reports coming in from human forces throughout the galaxy and felt satisfied that the first phase of their plan was working exactly as they had hoped. The Council was confused and frightened and beginning to understand that they faced an enemy unlike any they had fought before. The human attacks continued for weeks, and the pattern was always the same. Strike hard and fast at targets that would cause maximum disruption, then disappear before any response could be organized. The aliens began to realize that they were fighting an enemy that had learned from their own tactics and turned them back. Against them, High Counselor Zerkith called emergency sessions to discuss the human threat, but his advisors could offer no solutions to a problem they did not understand. How could a species that had been nearly exterminated 20 years ago suddenly possess the ability to strike anywhere in Council space with such precision and coordination? The answer was simple but terrifying for the Council to consider. Humanity had spent 20 years studying their enemies and preparing for exactly this kind of campaign. Every attack was the result of years of planning, and every human soldier was motivated by personal experience of Council betrayal and brutality. The attacks continued. The Galaxy Council began to understand that their comfortable assumption about human extinction had been completely wrong. They had not destroyed humanity, but had instead created something far more dangerous than the peaceful species they had originally feared. They had made an enemy that would never forget and never forgive.